Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. Click subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it is the YouTube channel or Apple, Spotify, Good Pods. Basically, wherever you listen to podcasts, chances are I'm going to be there. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema with film festival short film blocks, Leaving the Collection, Life Soundtrack, both of which I hope to get to in the near future, and much more. That is at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. So I want to begin this episode by taking you back 25 years. I was in my fourth year of college at Georgia State. I was hanging up to a friend's house to go do some schoolwork with them. And they live in North Georgia, so was head up that way. I was driving a brown 1984 Buick Skyhawk, the type of car where there was an indentation on the driver's side from an accident that I had gotten into, as well as the very thin cloth from the top of the ceiling of the car was coming down, basically touching my head. I pulled up next to a cop car, and they proceed to pull me over. And they asked me to step out, so I stepped out. I'm trying to do what I can. And they proceeded to search my car. Not quite sure why. Wasn't quite sure why at the time. When I was explaining the story later to my friends, I figured it was probably something, maybe he's got drugs or something like that. I was at the time a 22-year-old cis straight white male. If I had been any other color, there's entirely strong possibility that would have gone completely differently. I bring that story up to set the stage for this episode of the podcast. And it is the second episode in a series, kind of an impromptu series that I decided to do this year. We did the first episode about resistance to fascism in cinema with my good friend Jason from Binge Movies. And it's well worth taking another listen to that one to hear some things along the same lines of some of the things we're going to be talking about in this episode. This one is going to be a continuation of that fascism in cinema theme, this time looking at the context of the way that the police are represented in films, and the idea of the police state, the idea of law and order as sometimes it can be displayed in films. And I am really looking forward to discussing the three films we're going to discuss in the context of this. Join me is a return guest. He was last on for our class of 1999 episode of Toy Story 2. A much cheerier movie when it's not breaking our heart when it comes to Jesse. And he is the co-host of Nostalgia Cast as well as Back to Bluey. Please welcome back to the podcast, Darin Lundberg. Darin, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for allowing me to participate in this conversation.
And it's funny because of the fact that when I initially conceived of that episode with Jason a couple of episodes ago, where we talked about The Great Dictator, we talked about Rome Open City, we talked about Footloose. it was intended as kind of a one-off because he and I both had a lot of things we need to say about what's been going on politically in America with the re-election of Donald J. Trump, and I just had shit I need to say, and Jason really brought his knowledge, his research to the table, and we had a fantastic conversation. Not necessarily getting to it took us a while at times to get to the movies we were actually discussing. But the fact of the matter is that was the nature of the conversation. And I mean, you can hear our thoughts about all three of those movies. And this one, the one thing I want to say is not all of these episodes are necessarily going to be as in-depth as what Jason and I did. That was the one where it's like, okay, we're going to go all out in that one. This one of the ideas I had as I was starting to envision this as a series was to look at fascist ideas in the context of genres, in the context of specific types of stories to be told. And I know when you and I were talking about this one, I like the idea of what does it say? I mean, there's going to be at least one more episode where it's sort of along the same lines, but from a different perspective. How does Hollywood sometimes portray the idea of the police state? The idea of due process being suspended, albeit maybe just for one character or for a larger good that they have envisioned in order to get to a larger point. And I think one of the things I love about this trio of movies is the fact that all three of them are very, very different, but they all get to similar ideas, especially when it comes to due process, especially when it gets to police violence. We're getting into territory where police have been put on this pedestal for decades in Hollywood, whether it's TV, whether it's movies. But these movies kind of twist the knife a little bit in terms of, well, it's not really as clear-cut as that. And if it isn't clear-cut, if it's ultimately for greater good, is that something that is okay? Is that something we're willing to accept? And I love where we're starting with that idea in these movies, and I love where we're ending up.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I was kind of facetious when I said thank you for allowing me to. The reason I said that is your episode with Jason. Again, we talked off air. Jason is on another level. I like to think of Jason as like Inception. Like there are different layers that go deeper, and it's harder and harder to understand. And so Jason is operating at like level 4 sometimes, where I'm kind of like, you're getting it. You're basically hanging. And I mean this all as a compliment. And again, Brian, for that episode, you're able to match him. You guys were a great match for that. You have been in the past. So that I was just. Again, that put the fear into me, that episode. So it was really scary. A lot of stuff that that had an inkling of, but wasn't really fully aware of until it gets that real in-depth conversation. So like I was telling you, it's kind of a roundabout story. My wife, whenever we watch movies, she's not a critic like me. She doesn't have like the critical mind, talking about cinematography or acting. She just reacts like most people, like I liked it, or the story engaged me, or stuff like that. So, but whenever I ask her stuff, like I'll go into in-depth stuff about a movie, and then I go, "What did you think?" And she'll say, "I liked it." And like that's a joke a running joke, a running gag in our relationship, where that's basically her breadth of how she can express what and other times she'll if a movie really sparks her intellect, she'll dive into it. But mostly it's like, yeah, I liked it, or it was good, or I didn't like it, it was bad. And so look, the idea of fascism, the idea of police states is, again, it's something that's there, but since it doesn't, and I hope this doesn't sound bad, but since it doesn't really affect me, it's going to affect everybody that people don't think it's affecting. It's going to get to the point where it is affecting people, and I think people need to be at least aware so they can recognize the signs, or at least be able to avoid them. But my breadth of like knowledge of that stuff is more like my wife's, where I was listening to you and Jason talk, and it was like, I get it all, but if you were to turn around and ask me, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds terrible, right? I mean, that's and again, researching, and I made sure I wanted to at least research stuff, and I messaged you off before we did this, like, I know I'm not going to be as in-depth as Jason, and again, you were very understanding of that, but I do want this conversation. It's a fascinating idea from genre, and like you talked about with these 3 separate movies, they attack this idea of the police state in very different ways, and I think that's just a fascinating. But they, like you said, they all basically make the same kind of comment. They all kind of make the same kind of. They implant ideas in your head, stuff like that. So. Again, I didn't mean to be facetious saying that you allowed me to participate in the conversation. It's just I feel like this is something that I needed to research and dive deeper into than I have in the past, because politics is something that I've avoided for most of my life, but the older I get and the deeper and more disturbing things get, I can't avoid that anymore. So this was a good kind of reason to kind of dive a little deeper into that.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of people are starting to kind of realize, especially people like us who we're not going to be as impacted by some of the worst policies and some of the worst things that can happen as maybe some of our friends will be.
Right.
And I think that is, I think that's important to acknowledge that, we're almost coming from this from an outsider's perspective, because we are not going to feel the biggest brunt of what happens in some of these contexts, whether it's policies, whether it's laws that get passed in Congress, whether it is police shootings, whether it is police stops and the possibilities of what happens there. And it's one of those things, it's something where, I mean, this is one of those cases where social media is very much a double-edged sword, because we obviously, because of people we follow, people we don't follow but become more aware of, we become more aware of a lot of these issues that impact other people who are not us, but at the same time trying to find a way into that conversation ourselves. It's hard. We're coming at from a completely, almost an outsider's perspective compared to other people. And I think being able to acknowledge that, being able to recognize that in ourselves is a big part of growing in our political knowledge and our social knowledge in general.
Yeah, all excellent points. The 2 points that I basically want to make of that is, I'm half Chinese, and I've said this we've talked about this. I think you and I have talked about it. I talked about it on my podcast, Nostalgia Cast, but you wouldn't know that I'm half Chinese. I'm more, again, I was friends with somebody, lifelong friends, who thought I was Italian for our whole relationship. So I didn't face the same kind of persecution, the same kind of prejudice as my cousins did, as my aunts did, my grandparents did, right? So I guess I'm lucky in that way. I put lucky in quotation marks because, I don't want to think that I'm more privileged, but that's, like you said, it's just the way that it is. The other thing too is being a parent and trying to teach my kids how to navigate the world, how to teach them empathy, how to teach them to look at people and not as objects, not as things to be judged. Things that's important to me. But as I also get older and the more gray that I get in my beard, I'm also latching onto the idea of empathy and empathizing with all that. Like you and I have friends, like you said, that will be impacted by certain policies that have been affected. I don't want to turn a blind eye to that. I don't want to not be, because I try to be an empathetic person. If one of my friends is hurting, I want to be sure that I'm hurting along with them. It's not just, family troubles, things like that. It's the ways of the world. It's just like you talked about. We cannot keep turning it the other cheek to this stuff, especially as it affects more. And even if it doesn't affect us, Brian, the fact that it affects other people, I think that's important, that we should be taking note of that and letting our friends know, whatever the situation is, that we're also very supportive and empathetic to what's going on. And so that's why I think conversations like this are so important.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely with that. And I mean, that is part of what I want to do, these conversations. I mean, I've got some, and it's, and it's funny because of the fact that it was the one, going back to Jason in that episode, it was the choice of Footloose on his part.
Yeah.
That made me really recontextualize what this series could be. Because, I mean, Great Dictator, Rome Open City, very much about fascism, about resistance in a very direct way.
It's baked into their titles.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. But Footloose approaches it from a completely different perspective. One that we might feel a little bit more relatable to us. Not because of the fact that we relate to the exact issues going on in the film, but because we recognize that in what's going on around us.
Yeah.
And those issues don't feel as distant in a 40-year-old movie as they do in 80-year-old movies, like the earlier two were. Yeah. And part of the reason that was the trigger point for this series was because of the fact that it made me think, I want to do this, but I want to approach it not from a perspective of going the obvious route with these films.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's so interesting about this trio that we have is that, with the exception of one of them, and it'll be the first one that we talk about, like, few people really approach the latter two films we're about to talk about from a perspective of dealing with ideas of authoritarian rule, with dealing with ideas of corrupt institutions. Even though it's very directly baked into those narratives, you don't necessarily think about it for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And I think that is what was in sort of like with Footloose, it's approaching it from a completely different perspective than what we're used to, and I think that's really exciting.
Right. Yeah, Footloose was a great choice. I remember you telling me, cause we chat, we have each other's phone numbers. We're good friends, right? So we were able to chat back and forth about things, what we think about movies. You were kind of giving me kind of an idea of where your conversation was going to go, and the fact that Footloose is in there, it kind of was like, again, you don't think of Footloose as it's a kind of a jukebox musical kind of thing. It's an 80s movie where it's all about, sequence that are literally directed like music videos, right?
Yeah.
So so that's what you think about. You think about, you and I are big fans of Drew McWeeny. His 80s All Over show with Scott Weinberg, them talking about that ending of them just dancing. It doesn't matter that they're not the best dancers. They're not Fred Astaire. They're not Ginger Rogers, but they're dancing their feelings out. And it's one of the most, that's basically all that I remember about the movie, other than the soundtrack, because that's probably my favorite soundtracks. But it sends you out in such a high that that's really all you think. But it doesn't matter what the rest of the movie's about. It's that moment, that dance, and everybody's just free and they're just letting all their inhibitions. And so, but when you really think about it, the John Lithgow character, just the way that the town, because of the deaths or whatever, that kind of it's one of those things where as soon as you mention fascism and Footloose in the same sentence, it's like, of course, like that makes total sense. And that's, again, I've been watching a lot of reaction videos lately. I'm kind of addicted to just watching how other people watch movies, and I'm getting by turns frustrated, fascinated, and delighted by some certain things. But the thing that you notice is that people only watch movies on a surface level, it seems like.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't really engage, other than maybe talking about the filmmaking, or maybe if a theme kind of struck them in a certain way, then they'll talk about that. But most people only watch movies from a surface level. And I think someone that I appreciate has even said that some people don't even realize that movies can have meaning. Like, that's not what they watch movies for.
Right.
And so they don't, like, they can watch Footloose and not, the word fascism will never tie in. They'll watch The Great Dictator and say, oh, this is a play on Hitler, but that's it. They'll just know that Nazis are bad and it's kind of making fun of all those things. It's Rome Open City. It's like living in that time under that rule or whatever, but they won't. It's just frustrating that they won't engage on a different level, even with a movie like, which we could have talked about, RoboCop for this, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
There are actual conversations in that movie between bad guys about commerce and about free enterprise, where I don't understand, if you're watching that movie, why that would not strike you as, wait, what are they talking about?
Right.
But people will watch the movie and it won't even faze them. And I'm like, I don't understand what you're watching movies for. If something that blatant, or Starship Troopers does that too with the propaganda stuff, like, why? It's just fascinating that people I can't see movies on different levels. And so that's why, again, I keep saying this, conversations like this are very, very important, because we have to make people aware that movies are just more about entertainment delivery systems, right? There's more to them than that. Or they can't, that may be all some movies are, like Footloose, like you said, but there are other ideas that are being talked about and debated in these movies that you can't, I don't know, you can't ignore them. I don't understand why people don't see these things when they're watching these movies.
No, and I mean, you're absolutely right. We could have easily talked about RoboCop in this context, and it would have made all the sense in the world. Like, hell, you could do an entire episode of Verhoeven films for this series alone, just between RoboCop and Starship Troopers. But I mean, that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of get away from the ones that you would naturally think about.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's going to be another episode later on in the series where we very deliberately omitted one particular film that would have made all the sense in the world for that group. But we went in a different direction because of the fact that A, it still fit within the context of what we're doing, but B, that movie's been talked about to death in this context.
Right.
And I mean, it's not to say that Don Siegel's Dirty Harry, which is the first film we're going to be talking about, hasn't necessarily been talking about that. I mean, the Dirty Harry franchise is one where it's very much, as the franchise went on, it became more and more ideologically complicated in terms of what was it trying to say about a character like Harry Callahan, that he keeps doing it. Death Wish is another 70s franchise that is very much in the same context in that respect, where it's like the first movie seems to be very, very much telling some specific story, but then the subsequent movies muddy the waters for one reason or another, usually because of the fact that they're kind of dumbing down the premise.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's something we talk about in Nostalgia Cast all the time. Is like, how can we have conversations about movies that countless people have already had conversations about? What new stuff other than like personal perspective, what other things can we add to it? But yeah, Yeah. Basically, I totally agree with you. And the sequels don't matter to me. I guess, like, for Magnum Force, I guess to kind of counter the idea that Harry Callahan is like a fascist, they tried, what's the old adage that if you want to introduce, if you want to get the audience to root for your bad guy, you introduce a worse bad guy.
Yeah.
And so they introduce these characters, this Magnum Force, that are full on. I believe it looks like they're in Gestapo uniforms, or they're running around like, exerting their vigilante justice on people. Or even Harry Callahan is like, hold on, guys, like, you're going way too far, which is crazy. So at least that tried to either one up or kind of double down. And again, it gets dumber. The filmmaking gets dumber. I think the thing with Dirty Harry, and even Ebert and Siskel and Kale said this, was, yeah, there are ideas that are in here that are very controversial, but it's so well made as a movie that it's fascinating because you're kind of put off by it. You're disgusted by what you're watching, but you're still because it's so well done, and it's kind of enrapturing you in this idea of this ugliness and behaviors and attitudes and actions. But because it's made so well, it kind of, you know what I mean? It kind of makes you feel bad that you're siding with a character you shouldn't feel bad for siding with. But
Right.
That's, other than Magnum Force, which again is a very dumb movie compared to Dirty Harry. I think that they just didn't. Dirty Harry is really a smart movie when you look at it, when you study it and everything. But yeah, all the other sequels, and same with like RoboCop, same with all these movies that mean something. I just don't think that they can double down on the ideas. They have to double down on the aesthetics.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the things about Dirty Harry that is so compelling is that, so if you've watched David Fincher's Zodiac, you know that Dirty Harry is basically inspired by Mark Ruffalo's character from Zodiac, who is a real person going after Zodiac Killer, and Scorpio in Dirty Harry is based off of Zodiac. And one of the things I think is so striking, and this, I'll admit, this was actually my first time watching it. It had always been on the list of, well, I definitely want to get to this at some point, and I just never got that. Or one of the things that was so great about you putting this out here as a possibility when we started talking about this episode was, well, this gives me a perfect reason to finally watch this. And one of the things that I am very impressed with how Siegel approaches this is a very bleak story in a lot of ways. Scorpio is a sociopath, and Harry Callahan is a sociopath. He's racist. He's not afraid to shoot first and ask questions later.
While eating a hot dog.
Yeah, exactly. But because one of the things that is so interesting about the way Siegel shoots this film, it is very brightly lit. He really makes use of San Francisco during the day in a way that if this movie had been done in the same way as, I mean, honestly, either of the other two movies that we're talking about, it would be a very different feeling I think we would have in watching it. It would be a much harder watch than just from a thematic standpoint.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that this was your first watch of it, because knowing as much of a film scholar as you are, I thought this would have been in your repertoire already. But again, some movies just we don't get around to, right? Even though we know that we should probably watch them at a certain point, we just don't get to that point.
Yeah.
And so again, using this as an excuse, again, great way to do that. We did, when Johnny and I did our 70s Palooza season of Nostalgia Cast, we did cover Dirty Harry, but again, Nostalgia Cast is a different. I don't like to dive too deep into political stuff like that. It's more trying to focus on the movies itself, because again, if we do that, family members aren't going to know what we're talking about. So, but when we covered Dirty Harry, that was one, just to give you my experience with it, Dirty Harry was a homework movie. It's one of those movies where if you're studying, if you decide, well, I'm going to be a film scholar, Dirty Harry is on that list, whether it's from a Clint Eastwood perspective, whether it's from 70s cop thriller perspective, stuff like that. Dirty Harry is on that list. So I remember watching it in the 90s and liking it. But like I said when I was talking about my intro to this episode and prep for this episode, the fascism idea didn't hit me the first time I watched, because I just watched it as a regular movie, right? Not within the context of when it was made or how, which is what I should have done. But when I watched it for Nostalgia Cast, I don't want to say grinning from ear to ear, but when the movie first starts, it seems very generic. Like if you've seen one cop procedural movie, you've seen them all.
Yeah.
And Dirty Harry, even though it basically maybe started, I can't really say that it was the first one, but it seemed to be the first one that was really a huge hit as far as being, what you'll see in a Law and Order episode, what you'll see in a Chicago PD episode, that kind of thing. So it's very normal, except it keeps doing these weird kind of diversions. So obviously Scorpio is the main villain, but even though Callahan is pursuing this, he will still break off. Like when they're waiting for some evidence, he'll break off. He goes down and eats dinner. That's when the bank robbery happens, which that's did he fire 5 shots or 6? Do you feel lucky punk? Which I always thought was how the movie opened, but no, that's kind of a third of the way into the movie. But it breaks off into that, where the black bank robbers, things like that. It breaks off into later on, again, they're investigating, and there's a jumper, which he takes a tangent and he goes up and he's trying to talk this jumper down and punches the guy to get him down. And so, but other than that, it's kind of laying the seeds for that second half or that third act. But for the most part, when you watch the movie, it's very generic. Like, again, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. It hits all those points. It has the partner who's going to get shot. It has like the captain telling me, you're a reckless, you have no purpose to you, Harry. You're out there just doing what you want to do, and you're not what a cop should be, that kind of thing. And then it ends with them figuring out how to get a hold of Scorpio, like he was dealing with I can't remember exactly, but how they find him, how they find where he's holed up. That's basically all very TV-ish. But then it does something that, like I said, I don't want to say it got me grinning from ear to ear, but it all of a sudden I sat up and started really paying attention. It's when Callahan has Scorpio, who, like you said, is a sociopath. We've seen him do all these terrible things, right? He's kidnapped a girl, he's raped and kidnapped and probably killed this girl, right? And so that's what Harry's trying to find him for. There's no excusing anything that Scorpio does. He's a plain old evil. He's evil, right? And we side with Harry because he's the cop. Like, that's the kind of the mood that we're in. But when Harry shoots him in the leg and they're in that stadium and Scorpio's screaming for his rights, I have rights. And then Harry steps up to him and says, "Where's the girl?" And he steps on his leg. All of a sudden, the camera and the music goes haywire, right? The score, all of a sudden, starts screeching. And before we can see the violence, the camera shoots backward. So it eliminates us from the violence that's going on, because it's visually, that's basically telling us that this is wrong and we shouldn't be this is going way too far, right? That's what it hit me as. And then the rest of the movie becomes, Harry meets with his supervisors, and they're like, "You didn't give him his rights. We need to release him." It does all this where Scorpio goes and gets beat up. It does these things where and then it shows Harry, even after they've told him you can't pursue this guy anymore, he goes and stalks him still, right? So it's all of a sudden, that third act, or that last third, it becomes a completely different movie. And like I said, I was just fascinated by that. And that's what I mean. Like, it didn't hit me watching it the first time, but the older that I've gotten, watching it this time with the political stuff that's really getting heated and really bearing down on our shoulders, Brian, it was like, oh my gosh, like, for a 70s movie, how did they get away with this? And in a way, they didn't, because there's obviously a lot of criticism for it. But yeah, it's our experience with Dirty Harry. It seems very different, but I don't know. What do you think about all that? Did you have any thoughts on?
No, I mean, I think this movie moves like a bullet. Like, the fact that this is a 90-minute movie and it feels so fully formed.
Yeah,
like, there's no fat on this film whatsoever. That's one of the most impressive things about it. I mean, and to your point, I mean, this is basically ground zero of like 5 decades of police procedural movies and even TV shows. Like, I mean, there were moments where, the jumper scene you mentioned, it's like, oh my God, my first thought is obviously Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, exactly.
It hits the exact same beat when the ransom drop for the daughter's going. I think of another Mel Gibson movie with ransom,
Ransom. Yeah.
and I mean, it's one of those things where it's like so much of this film is baked into the DNA of what's come since.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that this movie came out the exact same year as French Connection.
Mm-hmm.
And French Connection, I mean, both of them are obviously extremely famous, extremely well loved, I think, by fans of the genre. But the fact that French Connection got more acclaim, but I think Dirty Harry got more into the zeitgeist of society. And I think it's interesting because of the fact that it kicked off both of those basically kicked off this decade where you're starting to see the moral gray areas of Law and Order. I mean, this a few years later we would have Watergate. We would have Nixon resigning. We're still deep in Vietnam at this time. And I think, and to your point on the scene where I think that is one of the most interesting twists in a lot of movies, a lot of police movies would not necessarily do this now, where the villain, who's very clearly the villain, gets away because his rights were infringed upon. And it makes you really think. It's like, well, we know he's done these things. We've seen that he does these things. But it's as much as it is showing us the moral gray areas of Callahan's work, it's also questioning us and making us realize it's like, if we were in the same position, would we even care about this person's rights? And why should we care about this person's rights? And irregardless of, and I mean, it really does boil down to something that you talked about at the offset, where we were talking about the idea of empathy. It's like, I think Scorpio is an awful human being. That doesn't mean, and yes, he's killing people, but if he's going to be brought to justice, I want to see him at least brought to justice in the right way. I don't want it to be one of these things where it's like, shoot first and ask questions later. I mean, I understand. I mean, it plays into it plays into the bloodlust, I think, at the heart of America in a lot of ways. I mean, you look at this in terms of our obsession with guns, our obsession with this whole idea of, just the lone person going in, saving the day, just taking care of every business for himself. And that's one of the things that I think it's fascinating that all three of these movies touch on that idea in a very different way.
Yeah. The whole idea of propaganda, it was fascinating researching this too, was like when Dragnet first came out and how Jack Webb wanted to make sure that it was, based on real cases. So we got I believe the LAPD involved, but they in turn said, well, we're going to have to give you the okay for your scripts, which is full on copy. Like they're kind of looking over Webb's shoulders saying, this is what you have to do. We want to make sure we're coming off the right way. Right. And that led to a bunch of the other procedural stuff like that. I think that's where the hero cop idea, or the propaganda idea started, was with Dragnet.
Yes.
And people taking different ideals. And then again, it's with the Dirty Harry movies. This one, again, my mind is really just kind of scattered here. But when you look at the criticisms for the movie, this was a huge hit. This movie was making a ton of money at the box office, and in a way, it was driving liberals kind of nuts because they were watching this movie going, "This guy's, he's violating civil rights, right?
Yeah.
He's going around killing everybody, doing whatever he wants, and audiences are cheering for it." Like, I don't think that liberals at the time understood why aren't people more in line with our ideals? Why are they? And again, it has to do with that disillusionment, I think, with the Watergate, with Vietnam, all that stuff. People were feeling, like we talked about, this kind of weight on their shoulders. They didn't know how to express it. Seeing Harry walk in there and not have to deal with authority, and not, bucking all the trends, bucking everybody, telling him what he has to do, that hit in a personal way that I think it should be upsetting. Like, it's meant to be upsetting. What makes this movie so fascinating, like I said, it starts off as a procedural, but when that camera shot pulls way back, now it's making a comment on it. It's like, how far can we go to this? Like you said, Brian. And so we want to see this guy punished, but it has to be within the rights of the law. But again, the movie is saying that some criminals can't be bargained with, right? I mean, literally, Scorpio, after he gets beat up, but then weirdly, like, he tries to get Callahan in trouble, and he does for a little bit, but then it seems like the public forgets about it. And then he goes and he kidnaps a bus full of children, and he's terrorizing these kids, right?
Yeah.
He's being awful. He's gonna kill them. When Harry chases him down with that great shot where Scorpio looks out and he just sees Harry, like, just on that bridge, and just knowing that, oh no, like this is like a harbinger of doom, right? As soon as Scorpio gets off that bus, the first thing that he does is he finds a little boy and he holds him hostage, right? I mean, and they have that kind of Wild West kind of showdown kind of thing. To me, it basically, this Scorpio guy, whether he's processed rightly or not, as soon as he gets out, he's going to keep doing this. And Harry's like the only guy that can put a stop. And Harry kills him in cold blood. But it's fascinating. This is why I think the sequels are so weird, is that Harry looks at his badge and he throws it in the river. To me, that's always saying that he did, justice was served, right? He got the criminal. It's at an end, but at what cost, right? It's cost him something. And he throws away his badge. And it's not a typical procedural because of that last third. And it's funny that the sequels, other than Magnum Force, like I said, to a degree, he just forgets about it. I can't remember how he gets back on the Force. But again, the sequels become, oh, isn't it funny how Harry's a fascist, right? It's just one of his cute character traits. But it doesn't deal with that idea like this movie does. And I just think it's just a fascinating idea for a cop movie.
And I think it's interesting. This is one of those movies where you can kind of, I think to a certain extent, you can point to the success of it and the enduring popularity of it, and look at it from a perspective of maybe more people are open to the idea of one person rule, taking the law into their own hands, doing what needs to be done for the quote unquote greater good than we care to admit. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's certainly bore witness in the past 10 years with Trump. And I mean, so many people are like, yes, I mean, whatever he does is inherently right, and that is what needs to be done. And it's really, this is the type of movie, I don't know that I would say it's necessarily a litmus test for your own morality, but I would hope that people watch it and question the ideas of right and wrong that it does, because honestly, we do want to see Scorpio punished for the exact same reason you said, because it doesn't matter how many times you arrest him, bring him in, he's going to just find a technicality, he's going to find a way out, he's going to keep doing this. So he needs to be stopped in one way or the other, and maybe that's this film's way of saying, well, sometimes maybe this is the only way to do it, because the alternative is they keep doing this. They keep getting away with it. And I think that is always a it's a fascinating I think that's a fascinating approach to this type of story. And I mean, you look at, you mentioned Dragnet, and Dragnet truly begat Law and Order and
Hmm.
the modern police procedural. And and I know for a fact, Law and Order does the exact same thing with the NYPD that Jack Webb
Hmm.
was doing with the LAPD. And then and you look at a movie like LA Confidential, which
Hmm.
approaches a lot of the same ideas,
Yep.
where you have these different three very different police officers who approach the job very differently. One of them who feels like he wants to do it exactly by the book, and the other two who they twist their own sense of right and wrong in a way that ultimately they're trying to get to the right, but doing it in the wrong ways. And it's always really fascinating to see. I mean, Lethal Weapon again is a great example of this with the character of Riggs.
Hmm.
Throughout that franchise, I mean, he's somebody who very much is, he's almost the extreme. He's almost the extreme final version of Harry Callahan, like
Hmm.
a cop who doesn't play by the rules, who is, who isn't afraid to use violence in any way, shape, or form that he needs to get the job done. And you know, Granted, he the character does not necessarily have the same sense of blatant racism that Harry Callahan is. The one thing I will say about Harry Callahan's racism is that he does not it isn't limited to just one group of people. He basically is a racist towards everybody. And I mean, I will say that much because, well, at least he doesn't. At least everybody's on a similar playing field for him.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's so compelling to watch this movie and to realize not only that, and I mean, I have seen Bullet, and it's funny, early on when the score was going, it's like, that sounds very much like Bullet, and I know that was Lalo Schifrin. Sure enough,
Yeah.
this is Lalo Schifrin as well. Makes all the sense in the world. His music is very distinctive, and but the thing is, it just makes sense for the context of what this movie is, and it approaches it in a way that is really unsettling. And I think the fact that it's unsettling is what makes this movie endure as much as it does.
Yeah. You mentioned that's because it out to be a full-on psychopath, right? I mean, but they kind of excuse it because his wife was killed, and so they, well, he's not in a good place, and that's why he's risking his life, that kind of thing. You have the interesting thing about Lethal Weapon was is kind of like the converse of 48 Hours, which you have the Reggie Hammond character who's the wild card, right? And that kind of and Jack Cates who's oddly enough, very, very racist, very bigoted in 48 Hours. And they don't shy away from that at all. They don't excuse it. That's just the way that Jack Cates is. That's just the way that Reggie is. Lethal Weapon is interesting because it flips it. Instead of making the black guy the loose cannon, they make Danny Glover the centered family man who's the source of sanity that Riggs needs so much. And it makes the white guy, like the mulleted white guy, kind of the nut job, right? The thing with Harry Callahan is I don't think they're trying to two-sided. I really think that the movie, the way that it's made, it's so convincing in its aesthetics that our brains just automatically side with Harry, no matter what he
Yeah.
does. Even if he's questioned, it's like, well, it's like you talked about. We're still like, well, he has to. There's got to be somebody to. I can't do it. There's got to be somebody to step up to the plate. But I love Dirty Harry as a conversation starter. It's very scary for people. It's a scary idea for someone to look at this movie and go, yeah, we need this. This is the only way to go. That's a scary way to live your life or the way
Yeah.
to think. But the way that I love that the movie presents it as, yeah, you watch it, you should be questioning these things. How far is he going? Is he going too far? Um, what's the line that he shouldn't be crossing? And again, the end, I think he does cross that line. He recognizes, so I can't be a cop anymore. I've kind of denied all of the rules and the kind of the ideals that I agreed to take upon myself when I first joined the force, right? And now I've done this thing where I've gone too far. I just think, again, I think the movie when Pauline Kael used the word fascist, when Ebert used the word fascist, you automatically can get people that love the movie go, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, it's not fascist. Like, I love this. I'm not a fascist, but I love this movie, so it can't be fascist, right? I'm not fascist, so the movie can't be fascist. And so they push back on that stuff. What I think is interesting is, yeah, Kael got started some controversy. Siskel's review, he gave it 4 stars, the highest rating possible, but he called it a dangerous movie, where it is teaching you certain things that maybe you shouldn't take to heart. You should be standing back at this going, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, guys, that kind of thing. But the idea, I love the idea that and again, there are fascist ideals in here. There are liberal ideas. There are conservative ideas in here. They're there, but it doesn't mean you're siding one or the other. I just like that it's there, so it gives you something to talk about. That's what made the movie interesting. If the movie had ended with them capturing Scorpio and putting him in jail, we would have forgotten it, I think.
Oh yeah.
Even though
Absolutely.
French Connection is more popular, Dirty Harry kind of, like you said, captured that zeitgeist. I love that Siegel has said that he's flat out a liberal. He leans to the left. Like he says, Eastwood is very conservative, leans to the right, but they never discussed it on set. And it's funny that Siegel says, I don't make political movies, from the director of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? It's like, it's funny that he says that, but I think he does it in a way where he's directing it as, he's just directing a movie, and it's what you bring to it that basically defines that. But the fact that there are fascist ideals in here, the fact that it's about a police state, does not mean that you can't enjoy this. It's just step back from it. Know what you're watching. Know what to talk about. Know what you should be processing as opposed to celebrating.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for this one, it's the whole idea of how much power do we really want the police to have? Are we and there's an inherent, it's been, from Dragnet on, it's very much been something that we have had put into our heads, this idea of, oh, you can trust the police. You can trust the police. They are going to do the right thing, theoretically speaking. But the question is, how do we want them to do the right thing? Ultimately, Harry is one of the fascinating contradictions of this movie is that Harry is nominally doing the right thing in trying to take out Scorpio. He's doing the right thing from a societal standard by taking out Scorpio. It's the ways in which he does it where, if we don't think about it, if we don't question it, that's where it gets dangerous. To Gene Siskel's point, where it's like, if we aren't left wondering, well, how do I feel about the way he approached Scorpio? I think that is to your point where the conversation starts, and just one of the many places where the conversation starts with this movie. And it's funny because we are going to, and it's funny because of the fact that all 3 of these movies ultimately revolve around main characters who take some semblance of the law into their own hands. And the second character we're going to be talking about is, Ben Richards is one of the things that's kind of interesting about Ben Richards, the Schwarzenegger character in our next film, The Running Man, is that he is portrayed in the film in very much the same type of way that Harry Callahan was, Like, society has been told that he's done this absolutely horrific thing in the name of law and order, in the name of justice. But the way they approach it is that is propaganda to cover up the truth that he was a good soldier who disobeyed orders. And that is no good for the society that has risen up in The Running Man. And it's, it's funny because of the fact that this is one of those movies. You brought up Drew McQueenie. He won't, I know he loved talking about in A's All Over, movies that were the future at the time they were made that is now our past. And The Rain Man is it's funny because of the fact that from a year standpoint when they take place, The Rain Man is now our past, but to a certain, but there are a lot of ways in which you could almost look at, you're almost concerned that The Rain Man could also be in our future in terms of what it's trying to, in terms of the world that it's trying to bring to life. And it's really fascinating to see, like, in The Running Man, it is very explicitly a police state. Like, it is, and it's this combination of corporations, entertainment with politics that we've kind of seen grow and expand over the past 20 years or so, 25 years or so. And it's fascinating to look at this as kind of another evolution in the type of moral outlook of Dirty Harry. Even though the main character is not a cop who breaks the rules, he is a character who breaks the rules because of the fact that he defies his orders of his superiors, and he's ostracized for it. And so in that way, Ben Richards is very much a spiritual, successor to Harry Callahan.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think this movie is as a dystopian kind of future. It's more 1984 than it is Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
But you're right in that it's, Ben Richards is a cop and he tried to do the right thing, and they're able to propagandize it to kind of turn negative light on themselves. The government turned the negative light on themselves and turn it on him, but still accomplish the means that they meant to accomplish, right? Except now they have a villain. Like, they know that they've gone too far. And they can use Richards as a scapegoat, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny that we also mentioned Verhoeven, because a lot of the commercials in this movie, a lot of the the game show stuff, a lot of the interviews that the Killian character, the Richard Dawson character does, is very. It's interesting that this came out the same year as RoboCop, and when I was watching it, this has been a movie that. I'll ask you what your history with this was before this conversation, but this is a movie that's been in my repertoire for a while. Like, growing up watching Schwarzenegger movies, it's a great one-liner delivery system. Like, this Stephen E. D'Souza screenplay is just great, and like he wrote in Commando. It's the same kind of vibe. It's just like watching Schwarzenegger kill a bunch of guys, but it's. Like I said, it's been a part of my repertoire, but watching it again last night, I was like, oh, this is a lot, like, the way that it's made is a lot dumber. Like, especially if you watch like the other two movies, like on the other side of it, like it's not as well made as the others, and it doesn't quite reach the Verhoeven satirical levels. And I think it's just because, and again, Johnny and I recently had a conversation on Total Recall, which is a very smart, subversive movie. But the fact that Schwarzenegger is in it automatically removes some IQ points when you're watching it. And I don't know if that's the Schwarzenegger effect, because he's been in some very smart movies. Predator also came out the same year, which is a great kind of attack on toxic masculinity and how, like, these tough soldier mercenary guys are basically taken out by something they don't understand, and how they talk in like 80s, tough boy kind of language, and they're taken out by this thing they don't quite grasp. And then later, obviously, the Terminator movie. Schwarzenegger's been in some very fun stuff. I think that I think Schwarzenegger's complaint, the Michael Glaser, is that the director's name
Yeah.
of this? Who oddly enough played Starsky in Starsky and Hutch, which is one of those 70s cop shows that Dragnet inspired, right? But I think Schwarzenegger's complaint was he shot it like a TV show. Like a lot of the smarter kind of points or themes that the movie is trying to cover, it kind of gets dumbed down, and I'm not sure if that's just the Schwarzenegger effect. Well, I mean, was this your first time watching The Running Man as well, or was
Oh
this?
God, no! I've been watching The Running Man since the '80s.
Okay, good. You're like me.
I've been watching The Running Man since the '80s. I love this movie. I won like I don't know about 2003, I think it was. I did with a couple of friends of mine. I did double feature of The Running Man Predator on my birthday, and it's like, I love this movie. This is terrific. And it's funny because of the fact that it's like I was about 10 when this movie came out, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about the social ideas and the political ideas that come up in this movie. And even in like the past few years when I've watched it, I haven't necessarily thought about those in the same way that I very explicitly did when we decided to do this movie for this episode and this rewatch. But at the same time, I always got the idea that the Running Man is a video game, is a reality TV show, as a way of, law and order, as far as justice, exacting justice. It's such a weird idea. It's such an out there idea. But the older you get, the more you realize it's like it really is playing off this idea of if it bleeds, it leads. Right? Yeah. Like it's that type of idea where it's like if it's violence in any way. I mean, that was really a huge mantra of 80s action movies.
Yep.
And I mean, where it's like the more violent and the more cartoonish you get, people are going to respond to it in a positive way. And one of the things I think is really fascinating about this, and I do agree that the direction is very TV-like. It's not, and TV in the way it used to be done, not now where it's almost as cinematic as movies in a lot of cases.
Exactly.
I think the thing, and this boils down to D'Souza's script and the story by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King, who wrote under his pseudonym. This idea that violence is entertainment. We have no problems seeing Law and Order enacted regardless of how it does, which is kind of it's an evolution in a way. It's the way it's done here is an evolution from Dirty Harry, where it's like it's the same basic idea where the system is going to exact justice in a way that we just accept because of the fact that the bad guys are getting theirs. And one of the things that I think is so fascinating about this film is that it also does play into the idea of propaganda, which is kind of going to fit into our third film in this discussion. And it plays into it because of the fact that the idea that everything is curated for the audience reaction, the positive audience reaction, whether it is the criminals getting punished, whether it's the criminals getting away. Like we see the way that they manipulate their audience for the Running Man in terms of sometimes giving them a happy ending. And like the they made it through the maze. So it's like they're off living their lives, but we realize the truth that nobody ever does that. And, just this idea that everything is curated to goose the emotional reaction of the audience. And it's just it's such a deceptively rich film, even though it fits very much within the context of a lot of other Schwarzenegger films in terms of how the action plays, in terms of the quips, in terms of the one-liners, and basically big, bulky, athletic macho men just kicking the shit out of one another. It's like this was both Rayman and Predator had him and Jesse Ventura in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, hey, look, another one with the two future governors. And no, so it's fascinating, and I love watching it now just because of how insane the idea is, but it's so well executed that you just go with it, and it's, you love to loathe Killian, but that just makes his death at the end of the movie so much more satisfying.
Well, again, what's fascinating about the movie is it's a comment, like it's a precursor to reality TV.
Yeah.
It predates AI deepfake stuff. When they deepfake Richard's and Amber's death at the end, it predates a lot of that. I love the idea that it's a comment on the gladiatorial combat in ancient Rome, right? Where it's kind of the bloodlust where people are just watching. And again, speaking of reaction videos, when I watch reaction videos of Gladiator, the consensus of that is when they're these reactors, YouTubers are watching, like, how did people enjoy this? What is so enjoyable about this?
Right.
But it's the same thing as boxing. It's the same thing as UFC stuff. It's like it's the bloodlust in us that kind of gets us to enjoy this. So it is a comment on that. But it's also funny that this led directly to the creation of American Gladiators, which I believe Dan Carr, John Ferraro, the creators of American Gladiators, that when they pitched their show, they were like, I think they showed a clip of The Running Man to the execs, were like this, just without the murder. And I think that was their whole look for it. So again, it's when I say that it's dumber than I remember, that's true. It seems like there's a lot of smart stuff going on in the background, but kind of a dumb jockey type one-liner, like as a delivery system, kind of overtakes it or plays on the surface of the deeper stuff, right? So we were mostly noticing. So when I say it's dumber, the filmmaking, if you look at Predator, John McTiernan's direction is so precise and so well done that it doesn't seem like a dumb movie, especially the longer that it goes. When you look at RoboCop, again, very smart. The satire in this is more of the dumb level. Like, obviously, Killian has a poster for a show called The Hate Boat, right? a lot of the commercials, that the announcer at the end is basically saying, like, if you want to be a contestant, just go to visit us, write in, like, give us your name, your birthday, and then go out and do something really despicable, right? Which is funny. But the way that RoboCop does it with their, like, the 6,000 Sucks commercials, with the Nukem commercials, the way that those commercials are presented in RoboCop are not so blatant. Although I buy that for $1 show that everybody's watching all the time. They're not so blatant. They don't blatantly state their theme, but they're funny in a way that makes you think, what is the point of Nukem? And it gets you talking. Oh, I get it. We're talking about, like, anyway, the privatization, all that other stuff. But Running Man, the difference is the comedy is more, and I don't mean this as a slight to Stephen E. D'Souza, because again, this is just how 80s movies. It's more dumb. It's more like, I love the line where they see Fireball lower and Amber's like, Jesus Christ. Yeah. And then Richard's like, guess again. I love that line. It's so funny. But, like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of fascinating ideas going on with the movie, but because the direction isn't as great as it could have been, they could have gotten a director that really would have, Verhoeven would have really doubled down really found and nitpicked all the right fruit to be able to talk about. So the ideas are there with this movie, but like I said, compared to the movies on the other side that we're either side of this one that we're talking about, it's not quite there. I just think that if they got a better director, they really would have been able to barrel down and make this more of a not such a dumb action movie.
No, exactly. Um, I think it's funny because of the fact that you mentioned 1984. Um, it also feels like the next evolution of like the world of Blade Runner,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
but even darker and more, not necessarily nihilistic, but more. It's the next evolution of what Blade Runner is showing, where society is in absolute decay, absolute ruins. And I mean, this really is a film, and we're going to get into it with the last film as well. This is a movie. It deals with class in a way, because I mean, look at all of the elites are going to the taping of The Rain Man. All they're dressing up to go see the taping of this TV show. And, Killian is, and even Maria Conchita Alonso's character, she's in this high rise. Like she has banned materials. And so it's like, it's this whole idea that there are people who feel like they can get away with anything because they have success, they have money, they have privilege, and they don't feel like that's going to be taken away. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of interesting about Amber's character to a certain extent. I mean, it's a very shallow character for the most part. It's largely an impactful character because of how she looks. But the fact of the matter is, it's like she's also a character where because she decided, because she made the choice, because she was taken by Richards, and she realizes afterwards that it's like, that's not when they show the footage of the airport. It's like, that's not what happened.
Mm-hmm.
She starts to make a choice. And it's always one of the things that's always interesting in these type of speculative science fiction type movies is when you see characters make choices that go against how they're intended to be by society. I mean, that's always a powerful arc in this type of movie. And you see it in so many other movies like this. I mean, you see it in Blade Runner, you see it in Dark City, you see it in Metropolis, going back to the Fritz Lang film. And I mean, it's all about a character deciding, I'm not going to do that. That's not who I am. And making and realizing that it's like, oh wow, this is the truth is not what I think it is. And this is very much a movie where waking up to the truth of the world is an important realization. And I think it is something that almost celebrates individuality because of the fact that, I mean, Ben Richards is an individual. He was a good soldier for the nation, for the corporation, for the government, until he was given something they didn't want to do. He didn't see the value in it, so he's punished for it. Amber's punished for the choices she makes.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talk about Amber. I think actually watching it this time, especially from a personal perspective, Amber is the what is her name? Amber Mendez. She's the most interesting character, I think, in the movie because she reminded me of me. Again, she's part of this world. Like you said, she lives in a high rise, right? She's kind of above everything that's going on below her. Richard's kind of, because he thinks it's his brother's house, for some reason they never changed the code. So he's able to get into her house and they chase each other around the apartment in their underwear, which is really kind of silly. But the way that, and again, it copies kind of Commando where they try to get on a plane so he can escape or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's some similarities in the screenplays. But like me, the fact that she escaped, she thinks she's done the right thing by getting Richards in custody. She watches it happen. When she watches that news report about him killing other people, and she's like, that's not what happened. Like me, kind of sitting above the whole politique of what's happening, above all the some regimes or fascist ideas that are kind of seeping into our everyday lives. There's an awakening that I have, like I talked about, where it's like I can't ignore this anymore. It's either affecting me already, I haven't realized it. It's either affecting me, I have realized it, or it's going to affect me. I can't just keep turning the blind eye. The difference is though is that because it's in this, and we make comparisons to Blade Runner. I'd also compare this to an extension of the world of Brazil.
Yeah.
Right? Where even you go back to the Bachman/King novel, where the whole point is when, the characters, Ben Richards in the book, he's very scrawny. I think they describe him as pre-tubercular. So he's not Schwarzenegger. But they did in the book, when you sign up for this as a money, kind of to help you out money-wise, like you're lower class, they declare you an enemy of the state. They give you like a 24-hour head start before they send the hunters after you, that kind of thing. Every hour you survive, you earn $100. There's a chance if you make it all the way through that you win $1 billion, like stuff like that, and go to your family, things like that. But every day they're given this camera that they're supposed to at least send, I think, 2 videos. This is the way the book is. You're supposed to record 2 videos to send to the game show network so they can actually know what's going on. But when Richards finds out in the book that things are happening where thinks he can make a difference, and he tries to weave these into his videos, the game show network, they dub him with obscenities and kind of ravings, right? So it's that same thing of kind of, it's a very totalitarian kind of world that they're living in, where the government can take things and change anything to fit their kind of perspective or their kind of propaganda. And so again, the book especially is more 1984 that way. But like I said, the Amber character is that awakening, and she's, like I said, she's forced into this where all of us are just kind of deciding whether we want to do this or not. But the Game Show Network people kind of literally throw her into the game, so she has to take part in it, right? I think that's a really interesting, and then that's really it. That's all there is to her character. They run around for a little bit. She hides the microchip in a place that she doesn't even tell Schwarzenegger about. So, but again, I just like the idea that it reminded me of me, and I bet a bunch of other people where they're like, yeah, stuff is going on that I can't ignore anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, and this is, it's a dirty word for conservatives. It's basically an insult that conservatives say. It's like, oh, that's woke, But the fact of the matter is, if you think about what the true definition of that phrase is, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's an awakening to the reality of the world and the injustices of the world. Yeah. And realizing that this world is not as much progress as this world as this society is made, we're not where we should be or where we want to be or where we think we are. I mean, that's the whole idea. It's like it's been made toxic by people who hate diversity, who hate the idea of a more equitable world for other people, who hate being called out on their bullshit. And the fact of the matter is, it's just one of those things where it's like, that's not what it means. You're kind of proving the point of people who are woke, because you're showing us exactly why we feel that way, because the world is not what we think it should be. And so, I mean, I do think that's kind of an interesting idea with this film. And one of the things I like about Richards in this movie is that Richards basically is somebody who he doesn't care about the resistance. He just wants to get out of jail.
Yeah.
But he just wants to live his life. He's not really out for vengeance. That's the thing. He's really not out for vengeance against the government that did this to him.
Yeah, that's how the movie starts. It's how his
Yeah.
arc starts. Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing it because of the fact that he just wants to live his life. And then gradually he has a similar turn the way Amber does, where he realizes we can break the wheel here. We can break this society by not playing by its rules. And this is an important thing to do.
I like the turning. I think Killian comes at him at the exact wrong time. I believe it's after Laughlin has been killed. And isn't it interesting because Ben Richards is such the tough guy? Laughlin, I think they make mention that he was a teacher at one point, and he kind of laments the idea that schools are shut down. And then Ben Richards says, well, it's time you stop teaching to street punks, that kind of thing. So they at least layer in this idea that he's, Laughlin is more than what, again, he's presented as a public. But the way that he dies after saving Richards' life, and then when Killian comes at him and says, you can be a hunter. Like, I recognize what's going on. You're probably going to keep killing everybody or whatever. Like, let's get you to work for me, right? He comes at him at the exact wrong time. I think that's where Richards really turns, and he grabs the camera and is like, I'm going to shove my fist down your throat and I'm going to yank out your spine. And so, again, it's the same thing like with Amber. He's there. I said that Amber is the most interesting, but Richards has that same arc, right? He doesn't want to be involved. They just want to get out. But the deeper that he gets into the game and the deeper that he sees what's going on, it's like you said, we can break the wheel. It's like, I'm done with this. Like, let's fight back. And even Mick, isn't it funny seeing Mick Fleetwood and Dweezil Zappa kind of in the same credit in the movie? I got a big laugh out of that. But it's when Mick Fleetwood basically says, I thought you were out of it. I thought you just wanted to get out. And Richards is like, no, it's, he basically cocks his gun or whatever. It says, I'm going to take part in this. Like, I told him I'd be back. I don't want to make him a liar, right? Again, a great one-liner. But yeah, there's, like I said, there's a lot of great, interesting stuff in this movie. And it's, we talk about like, the whole idea, these people are just blind to this. Like, racism itself is based on a lie, right? It's a lie that you tell yourself, like, I am better than people that are not my same color, or sexism. I'm better than someone who's not my gender. I should have more opportunities in this. And you're kind of blindly led to that. And again, the extension of that is fascism. The extent of that is being Hitler saying that the Jews should be eradicated because we are not equal, that kind of thing. Right? It's all based on lies. Like, when you look at, what is it, South Korea or some Chinese countries where they don't have access to actual news. They're just basically fed everything with propaganda. They're fed lies. They don't have an opportunity to react to what's going on because they're only one side. They don't have access to the other side. Right. The whole thing is based and built on this lie that you're better. And it's just, again, that's what this is. It's like, it's the Running Man is built on the lie that these people are bad, and that's why we're hunting them. Mm-hmm. We mentioned RoboCop. I thought it was an interest. My fascination with RoboCop has always been because it has different themes that it can cover, different subtext. I love it as an idea of like a meta look at violence in movies, because when Murphy in RoboCop is killed, it's the most horrifying, sadistic thing we've ever seen. But when the Emil character is literally melted by toxic waste, we're cheering in the audience, and that's technically a worse death than what Murphy got. It's the same thing as what's happening in Running Man, where they're cheering on the hunters to kill the contestants, right? But as soon as Richards kills Buzzsaw, right, all of a sudden everybody goes quiet. Like, they've seen the same violence. It's just being perpetuated against one of the people that they're cheering for. So now it's like, well, why is it's disturbing to them now because they're not getting their bloodlust, right? It's again, there's all these great, interesting ideas that the movie covers. I just wish, again, that it had a better director that could have really nailed down all this.
No, exactly. And I'm really fascinated to see what Edgar Wright's going to do with the material for his adaptation of it. And it's North Korea. That's the authoritarian state, not South
Korea. That's why I kind of changed and said Chinese.
Tried to declare martial law, but the parliament was like, no, the fuck you're not, and threw him out. If only more of our politicians had that type of strength now. But anyway, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, Dawson is praised for his performance in this movie, and deservingly so. I mean, he really is it's one of those performances that is iconic, and when you watch it, you understand why it's iconic.
Yeah.
Because he's the charismatic game show host that makes you feel like $1,000,000.
Just like Family Feud, right?
And just like certain people in our society today. Not naming any names, but no, it's one of those things where Killian is one of the things that's fascinating about Killian is the fact that Killian is the big boss in terms of the story that we're seeing, but we get the idea when he's on the phone with the government or the White House or Department of Justice that he's ultimately just a pawn for this. He acts like he has the power of those things, but he really isn't the service of them too. And that is one of those things that that dichotomy is really fascinating with the character.
Yeah, I think the only difference is like if you're looking at this as a metaphor for a current political state, like the whole idea of fascism is to have like a charismatic leader, right? I don't know if I'd call any of our leaders now charismatic. So that's what's kind of, that's kind of the disconnect between what's going on in the movie versus what's going on now.
Right. But no, I really this has always been such a fun movie, and the more you watch it, the realize there's a little bit more to it than it's not as explicitly satirical as RoboCop, as Starship Troopers, but it's very pointed in ways that are interesting the more you watch it.
Yeah, not every director can be Paul Verhoeven. So there's that.
Yeah, well, yes, of course. One that is on that level, at least in terms of craft, is our final director, and he is Christopher Nolan, and we were talking about 2012's The Dark Knight Rises, and I know from conversations you and I have had, and I know from posts that you've shared online, just how much the Dark Knight trilogy means to you. So when you brought this up, I understood because it made all the sense in the world with regards to this particular subject and how it approaches the idea of propaganda with a very direct point of, and how do the police justify some of the things that they do. And I think one of the things that is interesting in this movie, it's funny because of the fact that a lot of people, to get slightly off topic, but it's not as off topic as it's going to sound like. A lot of people talk about the Star Wars prequels. They're obviously drawing parallels to now, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at the political situations in the early 2000s in World War II, you see the parallels in some of the dialogue, in some of the ideas of what's going on, and similar to that when it comes to the war on terror, the war in Iraq, and, if you're not with me, you're my enemy. In terms of the Star Wars prequels, Christopher Nolan was very much in the Dark Knight trilogy, very much playing off of a lot of the politics at the time. And you look at that idea of escalation in The Dark Knight when it comes to increased surveillance, a shadowy apparatus that takes away some of our rights to privacy, And you look at it in terms of what happens at the end of that movie with the way that Batman and Gordon twist the death of Harvey Dent into something that we will find in this one is done for a greater good in terms of cleaning up the city of Gotham, but comes with a moral cost and comes with an ethical cost. And we see it exploited by Bane in this film and the way he exposes it and the way that he exposes Gordon in a way that we, intellectually speaking, we can understand why Gordon did what he did, but we also see the inherent lack of due process, the lack of putting away civil rights for the greater good, and was that necessarily the right call? And it kind of bites them on the ass in this movie in a big way.
Well, The Dark Knight Rises, again, it's the one that people are always kind of thumb their noses at, right? And I think part of it is coming after a movie that was as well received as The Dark Knight, right? We've seen this happen a lot, where a movie that comes out after a celebrated second movie, like we saw it with Return of the Jedi after Empire Strikes Back, right? We saw it with, well, I'm sure there's countless other things, but you know what I mean? It kind of suffers from that redheaded stepchildness of it's not as good as the movie that came of. Godfather 3 is another one. It's not as good as the first two, so therefore it's not good, which I don't agree with. I think that part of the reason that the Dark Knight trilogy means so much to me, like you said, is Batman's always been really huge for me growing up. And I think watching Batman Begins, I was like, as someone who watched the Burton movies and the Schumacher movies, go, they're fun, but they don't really get what I really love about Batman. They're not really getting that. Watching Batman Begins on a big screen was like, somebody gets me. And I'll always be grateful to Christopher Nolan for the way that he was able to tap into, because a lot of times when you watch these comic book movies, it's assumed empathy where we know the characters. So the filmmaker's like, well, we don't have to do any of the work to convince you what's happening. And Batman Begins was completely different in that it told you the emotional crux of Bruce Wayne's journey, like why he's doing this. Not just telling us that, his parents were killed, but it really dove into that trauma, right? And the psychosis of it. And it treated Bruce Wayne as not a healthy person, but trying to be healthy, right? And so the first, Batman Begins is a very good genre picture. It did all those things that most comic book movies don't do, like I said. Dark Knight kind of takes it, and I think Dark Knight was like kind of the game changer. It made $1 billion. I think it was the first comic book movie to gross $1 billion at the box office. It felt like art because it has a really downer of an ending. It's about choices having consequences, where you can watch Spider-Man have to decide between saving a tram full of kids and saving Mary Jane. He's able to do both because it's a superhero movie.
Right.
In The Dark Knight, they kill Gordon, you think, but then he's alive, so you're like, I knew that a comic book movie wouldn't do that. But then it does this thing where it kills the Rachel Dawes character because of the consequences of the choices that they're making. And to me, it was like, this is not playing around.
Yeah.
To the point where at the end where Two-Face is literally threatening Gordon's son, like to shoot him. And like, they just killed off one of the major characters. Why wouldn't Two-Face shoot this little boy in the head, right? So you're really on edge. So again, I think it elevated superhero movies at a certain point where The Dark Knight Rises comes out. And there's a certain point where Nolan feels like he had to make it. You know what I mean? Like he had to complete the trilogy. But there's also, like you said, they kind of weave in some, like the Batman Begins, it has the terrorism in it. It has like Scarecrow's gas is kind of like anthrax that we face, all this stuff. It kind of hints at stuff without really diving in. Dark Knight, like you said, it has the Patriot Act, I believe, where Batman takes all the cell phones and takes all of the security. He's able to do what Dirty Harry would do, where he doesn't have any jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Where he goes and gets the loud character and brings him back. And because it's a comic book movie, again, there's only so much explaining they do, because it's a guy that's dressed as a giant bat that's brought this guy to justice, right? And then it's a series of moral questions and moral actions that the movie keeps asking. And I don't know if Batman Begins or The Dark Knight really dove into the politics that it was talking about as much as The Dark Knight Rises really tries to captured the idea of fascism and what the police state, and it's my way or no way other, that kind of thing. And I want to go and obviously and defend Dark Knight Rises. A part of the conversation we're having is, number one, the article that I sent you from Andrew O'Hare. I hope I pronounced his name right, from Salon.com. When I read his review of The Dark Knight Rises when the movie came out, he's the first one that mentioned, I think the title of his review is, looking into Christopher Nolan's evil masterpiece. He called it a fascist movie, right? And when I was listening to your episode with Jason, I was like, well, if I wanted to talk about fascist movies, I'll want to talk about The Dark Knight Rises, because that's a movie that, we're looking at these three from different, Dirty Harry is a cop procedural. Running Man is a dystopian sci-fi action movie. This is a comic book movie, right? They're different genres, like you talked, that are tackling this. But when you were watching The Dark Knight, when you rewatched it, you sent me a message saying that I forgot about the gymnastics that this movie was doing, and then you sent me some. This is what the kind of the movie is tackling. I want to hear from you, like what. Because again, I think it's more. Do you agree that, number one, that it's more heavy into the themes of the fascism than the themes that the first two did? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first one is, it's funny because of the fact that structurally speaking, it defies a lot of origin story movies, but at the same time, it also feels like an origin story.
Yeah.
The second one, certainly you have the allusions to the Patriot Act. Certainly you have the allusions to civil rights being suspended, due process, not really. In the choices that Batman and the Joker make to escalate the game between those two. But yeah, I do agree that Dark Knight Rises is as explicitly political in its ideas that Nolan did in this entire trilogy. And you start with the lie that Gordon and Batman tell about Dent's death. And it starts, and all of these, and the two of the main arcs in this movie involve lies that characters have told another, or suppressed, or truths that have been suppressed. Gordon has not told the full truth about what happened to Harvey Dent after Rachel's death. And Alfred has not told the truth to Bruce that Rachel didn't choose him. Rachel chose Harvey. And this idea, and the thing, one of the things that's so fascinating about Bane in this movie is that, yes, he is the most physical threat that we've seen Batman face. And he famously breaks his back, takes him to, somewhere in the Middle East to basically watch Gotham burn, essentially, in a prison where nobody escapes from. And that's where a lot of the gymnastics come into play when it comes to, is the timeline that all of this stuff takes place. That's basically what I meant when it comes to gymnastics. And it's like, how does this timeline make any sense whatsoever? It doesn't matter to me because I'm so engrossed in the story. It just doesn't matter. Which is, you were talking about you were talking about threes that kind of are invariably let down after twos. The other one that I was thinking of is Spider-Man 3 after Spider-Man 2.
I was hoping you'd bring that up. Yes.
And I mean, I think Spider-Man 3 in Dark Knight Rises in particular, even if it, thematically speaking, they don't really have a lot in common, one thing they do have in common is the fact that I think both of them have pretty specific flaws in them in terms of the logic and the mental gymnastics that you have to go through in order to make the narrative work.
Mm-hmm.
But you're so engrossed by the narrative that it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that is what both Sam Raimi and Chris Nolan have in common with both of those movies. And the thing that, we talk, I hint at the idea of class politics in The Rain Man. This one is very much about class in a lot of ways. And, Selena Kyle, played by Anne Hathaway, who, I think you astutely point out, it's like somebody pointed out that there's really not a bad Catwoman in like that we've necessarily gotten in any of the Batman movies. I'm not including the Halle Berry movie, but
nobody does.
But one of the things I find so fascinating about this, and it's like Hathaway is amazing in this movie. And this was also the same year Les Mis came out, and she won her Oscar for that. She's terrific. She is fantastic. I didn't even realize there was hate for her, but whatever. You guys are, if you hate Anne Hathaway, what the hell are you even talking about? I don't get it. But she's so good here, and she does. One of the things that is so fascinating about her character is the fact that she very plausibly gives us the sense of a character who could be something of a redemption for Bruce Wayne and give him his exit strategy that Rachel was supposed to be, but she's also a very formidable foe and intellectually speaking with him because of the fact that she is somebody who definitely does. She comes from the poor side of Gotham, and we see her. She's almost a Robin Hood type character in this movie, which I think is fascinating. Stealing from the rich to give to the poor, or take for herself, as the case may be. And I think it's just such a fascinating choice for that type of character.
Yeah. The thing with, and I'm so glad you brought up Spider-Man 3, because I know your Dark Knight Rises is basically or Spider-Man 3 is basically your Dark Knight Rises, right? We're both in the same camp that way. We're big defenders of the third movie that most people technically aren't defenders of, right? But the whole idea, and again, we'll get into the politics of everything, and I love Selena's how, another idea of fascism is you're kind of brainwashed, or you don't realize you're being brainwashed into following a certain kind of ideal. She thinks what Bane is doing, because she's in league with him, is the right thing. But eventually she, especially to the point where she sees the beatdown that Bruce gets, right? And that she's done that to him. I think that's what kind of starts her on her arc, like separating from her whole ideal. But again, she follows that ideal to begin with, but by the end of the movie, it's like, that's not what I wanted. Like, I want the things to be better, but I'm not going to follow Hitler, right? That's not what I wanted. I don't want to end up being a Nazi. So that's a good arc. But the thing with franchise movies is I love when a director is able to take a famous IP and make a statement with it, as opposed to just doing a version of the IP, right?
Yeah.
The reason the Dark Knight trilogy works so well is it's Nolan basically saying, no, I'm going to do this the way that I think. And he does it in a way that doesn't Batman Returns it. It doesn't turn people off in a way that disgusts them, right?
Right.
But he does it in a way that, again, is a very Christopher Nolan-y thing to do where people really appreciate it. But I love that each movie, and like we talked about, it's not, we have the Joker tease at the end, but like Nolan says, it's like, this is just an idea that the story could continue. They didn't have a whole idea in mind of where the movie would go. When they went for The Dark Knight, it was like, well, okay, what story can we tell this time, as opposed to having a sequel plan, right? And then they told the story about anarchy or order versus chaos. That's what the whole movie's about. I think Dark Knight is very solid, even though Batman Begins is generic in a way, like you talked about it. It kind of bends the origin story, but it is an origin story the same way. Dark Knight is very. You can get away with a lot because they treat Joker as a metaphor, as kind of like a whirlwind or a storm that can come in at any place, and that's how he's able to know where everybody is or what everybody's thinking. He's always 3 steps ahead of everybody, but they treat him in a way where he's a force of nature, where it's plausible as a statement on Joker, what he means for the Batman character, right? So they get away with that. So I think it's very solid and tight from that perspective. Dark Knight Rises is just, it's my problem with the movie is that it's super unwieldy. It's
Yeah.
not as tight or not as purposeful as the other two. It's got so much on its mind that because you and I are big fans of AI, artificial intelligence, right? Which is not Spielberg's, I'd say, best movie, but I believe it's our favorite movie that he directed from a conversation we had previously, right?
Yeah.
But that movie is still very unwieldy. It's more about ideas than being, it's not Jaws, right? It's not as solid and tight as Jaws is, but the fact that it's about ideas is just more fascinating to me. The fact that Dark Knight Rises has so many ideas, that's really what I latch on to.
Yeah.
The idea that the movie is about power structures. It's about putting your faith in something that fails you. How the Dent Act is basically a huge lie that people are basing their whole identity on. Like you said with Alfred, he's like, he hides that letter, and then it's about the lie, and it's how it's eating at people. Like he tells Bruce, like, you're not living. Rachel, you lost her, but you're not living a life. It's like Gordon. Isn't it fascinating that the way that the Dark Knight ends is, yeah, we can't let the Joker win. We're going to make Harvey, I'll take the fall, which is a fascinating way to end a comic book movie. It's fascinating that they took, even though I've said before that maybe Nolan's heart wasn't quite in the movie as much as the other two, but the fact that they took that idea of creating a lie and how it's eating at Gordon and it's eating at Bruce. Gordon is like the Brett Cullen character says, or the Matthew Modine character says, like they're going to replace him because he was a good commissioner during wartime, right? And Gordon's written this letter about how no, the Dent Act is all a complete lie, and he's going to read it, but just never gets around to it. Gets it stolen by Bane, and Bane's the one that is able to take it and use it as his polemic or whatever to kind of blow up Gotham, that kind of thing. It's like you said with the timeline, it's very unwieldy. There's a bunch of stuff going on. It's the power structures. Every character has an Alfred, I like to say. You've got Bruce who's got Alfred. You've got Bane. His Alfred is Talia, right?
Yeah.
You've got the Joseph Gordon-Levitt character who's got his, I think Chris Ellis plays the father figure, like his literal father that he was under when he was part of the orphanage, right? So that's his Alfred. I'm forgetting John Blake, right? Or Robin John Blake, as they call him. So that's his Alfred. You've got Juno Temple's character. Her Alfred is basically Selena Kyle.
Yeah.
So you've got all these characters who have idols that they follow, but their structures fail them, right? Bruce has Alfred, but Alfred has kept the letter from him alive. That's what kind of breaks them up, right? You've got the Talia and Bane, their whole is based on a lie where she's done what Ra's al Ghul did, her dad, where she creates a whole new identity, right? You've got where the Juno Temple character is talking with Selena, and she's like, this is what you wanted, and you get a look from Hathaway, who again is so good that I think you just get it in her face that, yeah, this is not where I wanted to go with this, right? You've got the Levitt character, you've got John Blake, who the father is like, at the end, the father's like, there's no chance. We're all going to die. And John Blake's like, you're going to take away their hope like that? Like in their final moments? Like, don't do that. So again, the whole movie's about these power structures. But then it's Bruce, because the whole movie, and again, the whole arc, and sorry I'm talking so long on this because you can tell I'm very passionate about these movies, but the whole arc of this trilogy is Bruce finding peace. Bruce being healed from his trauma. And everybody in this movie is fascinating, from Morgan Freeman telling him, the Marion Cotillard character is so beautiful. Maybe you should go and be with Miranda Tate.
Right.
Or how Alfred is trying to basically fix up Bruce Wayne with Selena Kyle. They're basically telling him you need to move on. He goes to see Thomas Lennon at the hospital. And the whole point of that scene is, so Bruce can get in the hospital so he can get access to Gordon. But when he's talking to the Lennon character, Thomas Lennon is like, you've got no cartilage in your knee. Like, you can't keep doing this, right? The whole movie, and again, it's hubris. When Batman faces Bane, he has no chance against him because he's not as committed anymore to his ideal. He wants to be destroyed. It's that whole being healed, and then you have I love the kind of visual connection between Bruce falling in the well in Batman Begins and the pit, that hole that he tries to climb out of. And he's been trying to do that his whole life, and he finally does it. It starts him on his path. But It's about Bruce realizing that I can't be Batman anymore. We've got to build these structures back up. And it ends on a shot. Well, it doesn't really end on a shot, but it's literally where Bruce's estate is giving out like all the different things that the money's going to go to. And they've donated Wayne Manor to be the home to take care of the wayward children,
Yeah.
right? Which is the whole point of where Bruce's character started from. It's like he should have had some structure. And when the Blake character goes to see him, it's like, why did you abandon us, right? You should have been one of us. Like we looked up to you, but you weren't there. And so that's Bruce realizing at the end, I've got to give something back. Alfred says to him the whole time, don't be Batman, be Bruce Wayne. Start giving back to the city. Give to the cops, give to everything. So I don't know. I just love that idea of, power structures fail us, but it's about how do we build those back up? And it ends again with Blake literally rising on that platform. It's like, will this be a better world than what we've gotten already? Because it is a very fascist. All superheroes, Brian, would you agree, are fascist in a certain way? That's like they're doing the thing that nobody else can do.
It's the whole idea of it. It's the whole authoritarian idea of one person taking care of the hard things.
Yeah.
And the way that authoritarians hold on to power is specifically because of the fact that they position themselves in a way where only they can take care of the ills of the world. And, one of the things that is fascinating about superhero movies in that respect is you look at characters like Iron Man, you look at characters like Superman, you look at characters like Batman, an excellent example. There are very few movie characters like Captain America, where he is somebody who, in a way, John Blake is the most like Captain America, right? Like, he is the character who wants to do right. He got into it because of the fact that he wants to do right. And one of the things that the reason that Wayne makes a big part of the reason that Wayne makes the choices he makes in this movie at the end is because of Blake. Because he's seen in Blake the ideal of what Batman can be. Like, he's not as, yes, he comes from a broken childhood, but he also has made that his strength and not weakness. And he's done it, he's used that as a way to motivate him, to drive him to do what is right in a way that Batman needs, as opposed to just being a lawless character. And
But that's
I think that is one of the fascinating things about this movie.
Yeah, that's an arc that's planned from the very first. Like Bruce didn't plan on doing this forever. He just wants to get to a point where he can be the example. Dark Knight continues that. It's like I wanted to inspire people. He sees in Dent, oh, this could be my way out. Like he's the White Knight, right? But again, Dent has problems, psychological problems that Joker's able to kind of exploit, right? But then when he finds Blake, you're absolutely right. He sees in Blake the ideal Batman, so to speak, if that's the choice that Blake wants the path that Blake wants to take, right? But he recognizes in that and is able to make that character arc or make that change because of that as his, I guess, the change, the switching point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the thing about Bane that is really the thing about Bane and Talia al Ghul in this movie is, and they even call him this in the movie. Bane is essentially a warlord. Yeah. Like he just takes over, and his rule of law is what governs the city when they've isolated the city. And yes, he has acolytes that admire him, that look up to him, but his biggest strength is fear.
Yes.
his biggest strength is fear, and Talia is the person behind the muscle.
Mhm.
Like she is the one she is the one that is ultimately pressing all of the buttons to get Gotham in the place that is for a good portion of the second half of the movie. And I think that's an interesting way of approaching this idea. Like, and you hit on it with Dark Knight. Like, the Joker's the embodiment of chaos. And one of the things that is so great about that movie is that Batman and Joker are two sides of the same coin. They're both chaotic characters in their own way. Regardless of whether Bruce sees himself that way or not, he is a character that sows chaos because it goes against the societal order that of law and order, justice, and that's a fascinating aspect. And so when he retires, when we see him that he's retired, it's like we know he's not going to be retired because of the fact that we know he's going to come back.
Yeah.
But it is an uneasy piece that he's found himself in. And it's driven by the fact that he's just washed himself in grief. Mm-hmm. In a way that even in the beginning of his story, he does similarly by leaving Gotham when his parents after his parents have died, and it's like that's another grieving technique that he does in the beginning of he is grieving at the beginning of Dark Knight Rises because he doesn't feel like he has anything to live for.
Yeah. Well, as far as propaganda goes in the movie too, I think a really funny image, and I don't know why it's so funny, but literally when part of the flaws of the movie that kind of make it harder for me to put it above Batman Begins or The Dark Knight is some of the stuff is just silly or inexplainable. Like you talked about, the timeline is really off, like it doesn't really match up, or does it, that kind of thing. The Batman voice, Bale's Batman voice, is kind of parodic in a way in this movie where it's a little too much. Yeah. Where you kind of laugh at it. The villain deaths, even though I'm not big on these horrible villains getting these grandiose, super awesome deaths, which they don't deserve. Like a serial killer shouldn't get a grand death. That's not the kind of death they deserve, right? They shouldn't be, aggrandized like that. Even though I don't mind the villains' deaths in this, they are still kind of silly. I don't know why Cotillard goes like that. You know what I mean? It's a little odd, but. Again, there's just so many ideas to this thing. And one of the things that I absolutely, like I said, to go back to the propaganda thing, it's I don't know if it's meant to be funny, but literally when all the cops are in there, one of the biggest flaws or funny things is how the cops are literally buried underground for I don't know how long, like 6 months or something like that. And I think they hint that Blake or the Resistance are passing them like shaving kits or giving them food or things like that. But it is funny that I think Jason. Again, to bring Jason up from Binge Movies, it's like they're shitting in buckets down below. Just imagining that is kind of funny. But they emerge from their hole when Batman frees them, and they're all clean shaven. When they show up in their dress blues, again, that's very propaganda. It's like, we're supposed to cheer for these guys because they're in their dress blues. But again, it's that Dirty Harry thing. They're fighting back against the bad guys or whatever. Right. Even though the Dent Act put these criminals in prison without the possibility of parole. There's your due process, right? It's like you're under under a lie. All this was done, and so when they're freed, it's kind of like a mirror of Batman Begins when Ra's al Ghul frees all the prisoners of Arkham or whatever. But this time it's like, take back your city, like Bane says, right? So again, there's very silly stuff. There's very stuff that I don't understand why Nolan did that. Knowing Nolan is we know him now. But the fact that and we can talk more about the politics or the Fascism and anything. The fact that this movie is an emotional end to the Bruce Wayne journey. How again, it's about Bruce Wayne trying to find peace, and he does get it at the end to the point where I was shocked by that final shot of Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Like for a franchise, we've talked about it already in this episode. A franchise is mostly just built on IPs to be built on IPs. But the fact that at the end we think Bruce has given his life on, which again is a quality end for him, right? But then when it builds back, we're talking about building back up, building structures back. You get the Hans Zimmer music, how it's very solemn, and then all of a sudden there's a switch where Morgan Freeman Lucius Fox is telling this guys, just tell me what I could have done to fix it. Like what could I have done to fix that autopilot, right? And his workers are like, it's already been fixed. There's already a patch. And then there's a shift where the music starts getting uplifting and it builds back up. And then again, Alfred it's basically the Good Will Hunting ending, right? Where it's Ben Affleck telling Matt Damon, I want you to disappear. And that's what happens, right? But when Alfred says there's a little cafe that I found, and I always thought that I'd see you, at the end when you see Alfred walk into that cafe, and how heartbreaking is it when Alfred comes back and he's like, I failed. He's at the gravesite. I failed you. Trust me with one thing, and I couldn't do that for you, right? But you see him, but then again, it's Bruce giving Gordon that extra lift. It's Bruce giving Lucius that extra lift. When you see Alfred at that cafe, you kind of sit up. You're like, is this going to happen? And like I said, I was completely shocked in that theater where you get that shot of Bruce just smiling at Alfred. All they have to do is nod. You see him with Selena, which is kind of like the icing on the cake there. In the same blues, somebody pointed out that Bruce finds on the flower in Batman Begins. So it's about that peace, right? And finding that and coming full circle. The fact that it ends with Bruce being happy, I was shocked that a franchise movie would do that. The same summer we got Avengers, which ends in a way that says, oh, it's not just a culmination of 5 movies. Now we're going to go on forever and ever and ever and ever.
Right.
Where The Dark Knight Rises, it gives a definitive end to that character's journey. And I was just shocked and just so moved that Nolan and Goyer and Jonathan Nolan were able to get this trilogy, even though this third one is as messy as it is, to get it to that point is something that I'm just in awe of and I'll always appreciate.
No, absolutely. And it is really like, I jokingly said the Rain Man has a happy ending as well, but that's because of the fact that the concluding with a 1980s power ballad just never really fails.
From the guy that sang St. Elmo's Fire.
Exactly. But no, the fact that this movie ends on such a note, and he gives each character a little clue, like, you're gonna be fine without me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be fine without you guys. And I'm gonna be fine without you. And the city is going to be fine without you. And it's funny because of the fact that, the scene where, the police being, underground for months. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like the arrogance of the police force to think that they know everything and they can control everything is upended. And, you see them all in their dress uniforms at the end going into the fight. And it's like, are we supposed to be cheering for these guys after what they've done? I mean, yes, that's where the propaganda idea comes into play, because of the fact that it's basing things off of the way that we've been hardwired in pop culture to naturally just be on the side of the police, regardless of how they act. It goes back to Dirty Harry, it goes back to Dragnet, it goes back to Law and Order, it goes back to Lethal Weapon. It goes back to this idea that we are, and by we, I mean we as a society, not necessarily we as individuals. We as a society are conditioned to feel a certain way about the police because of pop culture. And I think all of these movies, in a way they exploit that.
Yeah.
And I think that the way Dirty Harry does it is very explicit. I think the way that Dark Knight Rises does that is probably a little bit more subtle, and I think that is the choice because of the fact that we've seen the corruption of the police. One of the things that's interesting about Nolan's trilogy is he does not shy away from the corruption in the police department. He doesn't really shy away from it, even going back to Batman Begins and the Den Act and Blackgate Prison, which is essentially Gitmo. It's the natural progression of where this trilogy's been heading when it comes to its idea of the police. The police are almost as corrupt as the criminals, but we're conditioned to think that they're the good guys because they're allegedly on the side of society, even though they sometimes exploit society almost as much as the criminal element does.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's really fascinating. These movies, just like the Spider-Man trilogy, we can argue what's the best, what's the worst. Dark Knight trilogy, we can argue what's the best, what's the worst, what does it. In both of these trilogies, I think the themes, and we've talked about this before, the themes are very solid, and they lead from one movie to the next, and that's what we can argue about the surface level stuff that each movie does, how well it does it, how bad it does it, stuff like that. I just think thematically, each, like you talked about, it leads to the point with the cops. At the very least, like the cops, like that's where the story was headed from the beginning, right? So it's a natural progression. Same thing with Bruce trying to find somebody that doesn't have to be Batman anymore, that he can find a replacement, that he can, have the healing and be where he needs to be and be happy instead of always being in pain. I think thematically, I really love that all these movies are connected that way. That I think Batman Begins is very, again, superhero movie, origin story driven. The Dark Knight is very, very plot driven. One of my favorite things about that movie is how one scene is the direct cause of the scene that came before it, and it keeps building. So it feels intense and it feels exhausting, but it ends where it needs to end because there's nowhere else it can go, right? With Joker being defeated, I guess, put in quotation marks. But this one, it's very, like I said, I think this is very emotion driven. Dark Knight Rises is very emotion driven. Like you talk, even the cops, like, should we be treated like cheering for these guys? It's that same thing. It's like, I don't know. I just think it's very solid as far as the way that each movie is structured. Even if you don't like the way they're structured. I guess the final thing that I'll say about these three movies is that, they are inherently about police states, right? They are inherently about fascist ideals. But it's like the best movies can give you that stuff, but like I talked about with the reactors, it's fine that you can only watch a movie from a surface level. And I think each of these movies works on a surface level. If you're just looking for that, Dirty Harry is a good police procedural. Running Man's a good sci-fi action one-liner delivery system movie, right? This is a good Dark Knight Rises is a comic book movie on an epic scale, that kind of thing. I just think that, and the way that you view the movie can differ, but I just think that as long as a movie is convincing on the surface for what it's trying to do, and then it has all these themes underneath, that's what makes a great movie for me, as opposed to just, a good movie.
Yeah, exactly. Darin, thank you very much for joining me. As always, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah,
and
same.
It was great to have this conversation with you. Where can people find you and your podcast online?
Well, if you want to hear more of my rambling, unstructured ideas or thought process, you can visit us on NostalgiaCast. Just find NostalgiaCast podcast. You can go to Back to Bluey, which I co-host with our mutual friend Robert Yanis Jr. On Twitter, I am at DW Lundberg and at Blue Sky. This is so tough. How do they get the? I'm going to have to go into my Blue Sky to be able to find. So you can find me on Blue Sky at dwlundberg.bsky.social. They really need to shorten that. So it's not, so at least I can remember it. But yeah, you can find me on those two platforms. And yeah, currently we're a Nostalgia Cast. We're back into more 90s movies. Johnny and I are calling this our bucket list season, where we're tackling movies that we've always wanted to talk about 90s wise. And then back to Bluey. Robert and I just started up our third season, so please check us out over there. Again, all my ramblings and untethered thoughts.
Yeah, and I can't wait for the bucket list season of Nostalgia Cast when it comes to the 90s. I may or may not be a part of it later in the season. A little bit of a spoiler alert, but I am, as always, I look forward to talking to Darin in the future. I look forward to talking to Johnny in the future. Definitely need to have both of you guys back on. I just absolutely loved that nostalgic cinema episode we did last year for Sonic Cinema. And yeah.
Well, Brian, we love you. I just want to say that I talk about Jason being a different level, but your podcast, Sonic Cinema, what you're doing is, again, on a different level than what I think that I'm doing. And it's just listening to you talk, listening to your breadth of knowledge, being able to chat with you as friends, like on and off camera, right? On and off mic. It's something that we say social media is bad, but because I was able to meet you and I'm good friends with you, I wouldn't trade social media for the world. So you keep doing what you're doing too. Sonic Cinema is just chef's kiss.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I hope I hope everybody continues to enjoy this series. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up in this series, and this was a great discussion. It felt like this was the next discussion that made the most sense. I'm not sure which one's going to be next, but I'm looking forward to sharing the rest of these conversations with you. I have way more down the pipeline. But yeah, thank you once again for Darin for joining me on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. That's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema podcast. Like I said, there's going to be more coming from the Fascism in Cinema series, and a lot that you're not necessarily going to be expecting. We're also going to have some anniversary discussions. Hopefully have one of my dear friends who's never been on the podcast before to talk about a favorite movie of theirs and to talk about our friendship. And just it's gonna be an interesting year in the podcast, and I am looking forward to sharing that with you guys. Once again, check us out wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, or you can check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, as well as www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.